All right, first item on the agenda is the minutes from last week. Any comments or motion?
Motion approved.
We have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we go to the outreach plan.
So I can start it off. In the packet was the response of each of the members to the 5 questions in the 5 groups. I compiled them into one summary so we could all see them. A lot of them were the same. I try to kind of put them all together, ones that were similar to the same question. Dave, last communication was he was going to take a stab at answering these since he's answered them before in one form or fashion, and then we can have some input on those at an upcoming meeting. In addition, we took the liberty of putting together just like we have an overall timeline. Kyle was nice enough to put in his time and effort to put together a marketing timeline. And the way this looks is in addition to the questions and the groups that you might want to contact, there are probably some individually significant water users that perhaps you'll want to reach out to. And, we could discuss what you might want to do with those. But, as a talking point, I kind of put them on here to generate that discussion. And there might be some interested parties that we want to make sure we talk to get their feedback, or at least advise them as to what the plan is going forward. And then we've got our groups, and we've got our condominium associations, some town boards and committees, general public. And at the bottom, we have a list, and these are just things I came up with. It's not the official list or anything, but some sample materials we may have, and what we might want to use and when we might want to get them out. And so based on this, with May and the fall, a potential town meeting in the fall as targets, we can kind of work back as to when you want to set up these various meetings and what you would have to do, what level of effort would be required to get out in front of all these people if you chose to go and see them all. So once you've had a discussion as to who these people and groups finally will be, we can kind of come up with a more final schedule, a second draft, so to speak, and start lining those things up, and we can start talking about who might do that and what the format or agenda of each of those types of outreach might be, and who would actually do it. Also in the packet was a 1-pager. So for every single month here, we would have a page that indicates the agenda for that month, and what the topics were, and who might do it. So that was just to give you some insight as to how this might all come together. And to the extent I hear you got the committee generating some ideas, I'll take note of those and see if we can work them into this timeline so we have a sense of what our plan might look like, which might drive when we're going to have certain materials available, and when we need to be working on agendas and things like that.
Something just occurred to me too, looking at this list, that being in the middle of winter, I imagine there's going to be a lot of people we can't get to right now. So we may have to do this in 2 stages, as people who are in town versus people who aren't in town.
Yeah.
So whatever group we reach out to, we may have to do it again to the other part of the group that's not here right now.
A lot of people down south.
Yeah, a lot of, with the holidays and whatnot, a lot of vacation times are taken too. So something to think about.
Rich, when will we have a packet together that we can start to pass out to the public? Maybe make it known through Channel 18 that there's packets available at Town Hall here. And just to start the learning process.
Well, that's, I thought we were talking about a bit tonight. I think Dave has some comment on that. Before Dave jumps in though, I, did have some conversations with Kyle. It's all a little preliminary now, but we do have access to Facebook and, did make contact with Cape Media Center about getting them to do some videos. And, we have access to YouTube and our website, and we're prepared to go and, start issuing stuff through that. But the bottom line is I tell everybody with our website, whether a town department or a committee or whatever, it all comes down to content. So to your point,
Sure.
we need to start getting the content together, then we can start pushing the materials out. I can post things on Facebook, which has a pretty good following, and they'll have a number to contact and get the information, or to direct them to our website to get the information. And once we actually start getting this content, I'll push a lot of the materials that go on the water resources page onto the front page, which will draw traffic into the main page.
I think some of these hard packets would be great as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue, perhaps if you're ready. We gave you 3 handouts tonight.
Right.
One is frequently asked questions, which is actually in the back end of the water resources. They refer to it as the handbook. And these were documents prepared for Harwich. And then this is the more recent brochure on going through implementation. And this had the town meeting articles. This was the handout they used going into town meeting. So it had the articles that were coming up. And then it showed what the first item they were asking for money for on the back, what was involved and who was involved with it. So clearly, if you've had a chance to maybe thumb through and the handbook, this was intended to be the summary of the comprehensive wastewater management plan. Did you get a copy? You need a copy. Is there an extra one over there?
Yeah.
So that when we're talking about them, you'll know what they are.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Well, I think it's great, you know, relative to Harwich and Dennis, I'm sure. So you perceive Yarmouth having the same thing?
Yeah, so my
basically?
thought would be that we can start to generate a lot of this that's already in your comprehensive wastewater management plan, or we've updated it. Certainly, there are some components that will need to be generated at the back end still. But, you know, the first part is, you know, why are you even doing this? What is the issue? So it was meant to be educational.
Right.
And then it gets into what percent removal is needed in the different watersheds. What is a watershed? You know, defining those things so we can pull in the photos and figures that relate to Yarmouth. Then we can talk about some of the earlier phases of the implementation. And then, you know, look at your, instead of this map or figure, it would be what you see on the table here. Once we start to, you know, confirm that that's the phasing plan that the town wants to move forward with. We can give a little bit of a brief overview of what some of the discussions on the Dennis Howard Yarmouth partnership have been. But then I copied out the last 2 pages, which was this double-sided one, which we can walk through, because I started to compare that to the list that you generated, and half of them are almost word for word on that listing. But I think some of the others actually relate specifically, and if you'd like, we can take a minute and walk through these questions. And between now and the next meeting, we can update this to be specific to Yarmouth. You know, again, a lot of this is educational, or the what ifs of what happens if we don't move forward. Those types of things, which, you know, a lot of times we just cross out Harwich and put in Yarmouth because the answer's still the same. So then you'd have a 1-page, 2-sided handout that, you know, you could start using at the recycle center to hand out, or have available on the desk, the table out here in the hallway, or at the senior center, or wherever you feel appropriate. And that's easily generated. You know, this we can be working on, and then that other brochure that we talked about at the last meeting of, you know, what if I'm connected to the sewer? What if I'm still on Title V? And what if I have to DEP steps in and says, the town didn't move forward, but you have to do a nitrogen removal system on your own. So,
Well, I think we would all look forward to carrying some of these, once the finished product is out there, and to just pass them out, and then get involved in conversation as we're out meeting the public,
Mhm.
friends, coffee shop, whatever. And I think that, it's colorful, it's an easy read, it's got all the information that the layperson would need to look at the issue. And I think that anything more than that would be time consuming and people wouldn't read it.
yeah, people aren't gonna
brief.
read more than 12 pages. A
Right.
very few percentage, a small percentage are gonna read 12
Exactly.
pages. They're gonna flip it. That's why you'll see it's pretty heavy in
Yep.
figures and photos. That's why, the 4-pager going to town meeting was effective, because that's about the limit of what people are gonna read in detail. But this had in it, the specific articles, which was good, and what the ask was. We summarized what had already been approved prior to town meeting. So to give the impression that, hey, you've already started implementing your program. So this is a continuation.
Mm.
And it went through, ultimately when they endorsed what their cost recovery plan was, we were able to put in that, what the financial impact was to the typical homeowner on the sewer or not on the sewer, which is what 80+% of the people, that's the only thing they want to know.
Right, what check am I writing?
Exactly.
So if you'd like to take a minute, maybe we can walk through some of these questions and you can let me know if you think it's appropriate for here.
Just one question. How was this distributed in Harwich?
Good question. They made them available. We actually had display boards. They didn't do a mass mailing. They talked about doing, and we did at one time do a water bill stuffer, but there are actually a lot of regulations, and each town council interprets them different as to what information can go in those, as well as, paying for it, timing, all those things. But they did do a mailer explaining the program one time, and all the calls they got back asking questions about what was in the mailer were from people who lived off Cape. So it was their seasonal home, and, the water bill gets sent off Cape type of thing. And they had an interest because they were on the sewer off Cape and they wanted to know what was going on in Harwich. They got no calls from anyone who actually lived in Cape. That was because we had a number in there. If you have further questions, call, and it was to the town administrator's office. What we've set up actually in Dennis, which is worked out, is they have a email address that we've set up so that any citizen can go online and attach to that email and send in a question. And then it's either answered by the local town staff person, or they forward it to us to help get an answer, and it's sent back out. So that's worked out. I think that would be good here. We could add that at the back of the brochure.
Just to pick up on a thought, we had a meeting or two ago about getting the word out to the multitudes. I don't know what the cost benefit ratio would be of taking this piece of literature applied to Yarmouth, and let's say hypothetically sending it to every registered voter in the town of Yarmouth. I don't know if that's in the financial doability possibility or not, but I get the sense that the education that's going to be required to come up with a successful outcome is, despite the many years and the past effort, there's change. People involved then are gone. New people have moved into town, and almost have to start as if there had never been an effort just to have insurance for success.
It's not a one and done by any means. It's got to be done over and over again. Even after you reach a point and you pass your first town meeting articles to start implementing, the next time you go to town meeting to ask for money, you're going to have to do it again. And it's not one media. It's got to be multiple media. The Cape Cod Commission has done some studies down here, and the feedback is that the Cape population still likes, the vast majority still likes to have hard copy in front of them.
Yeah.
That's probably generational, but that's what the Cape is. They still get a lot of their input at the local coffee shop, because that's where they go every day, or whatever restaurant it's at. Versus, yes, you need Facebook, and yes, you need to put things online and on, because a lot of the off-Cape people will go and tie in to your website or look at the Facebook page. But the people who are here in town and live here year-round still like the hard copy. So Dennis has done a little bit more on the online. As I said, in Harwich, we did cable programs. Everything's posted online. You go on the Harwich website, there's a wastewater button of all the, they have the buttons for the main categories. There's a wastewater button. You hit that and it brings you to all the documents and everything posted related to wastewater, the current sewer program going on, which has been helpful. Because as soon as you pull up the website, you get that button right in front of you. So yeah, it's not a one and done, and you got to use several forms of media.
Why are we calling it the Clean Water Plan instead of wastewater?
Well,
Because it has different components to it.
Well, yeah, that's actually, I'll give him the credit. Mark Forrest came up with that from his years of dealing in the legislature and other, that it is more encompassing than just wastewater. Even your water resources brochure that we've generated for the town talks about stormwater, your water, drinking water supplies, wastewater. Now, the main component and what's driving this is wastewater related, but wastewater and the nitrogen issue touches all of those in the water cycle.
I'm just saying from a marketing point of view, people care a lot more about clean water than they care about wastewater.
That's open for discussion. I've seen it go either way. Most people, they'll say, well, it's water resources, it's the Clean Water Partnership, because you're taking wastewater and cleaning it to a very high standard, even though it's not drinking water.
And relating that to the Clean Waters Act as well was the other
Yep, you're right.
discussion item.
All the wastewater falls under the Federal Clean Water Act. So-
Just a thought.
Yeah, no, it's
It's a good one.
it's part of the education.
Just to tag on to what Dave was saying, just a suggestion. We had talked at the last meeting about when's a good time to start doing some outreach, and I've been thinking about that. Thought I'd present to committee. There might be a good opportunity on January 29th, a Board of Selectmen's meeting. And I can talk with Kurt about this a little bit afterwards to get some of the details, and then we can discuss an upcoming meeting. But it might be a good opportunity to update them as to the activities of the committee. And that might give you the green light to move forward on some of these things. For example, the committee is providing recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, and we've kind of given direction to CDM about a phase one that we think is appropriate. I think everybody would think that's appropriate, but at least tacitly ought to get the approval and give them that update. And that way, when we're going out and talking to the public, we've got the select board on board with us. And so looking at the agenda, that January 29th might be a good date, and I can work on an agenda and on how that we might present that if you'd like. But that might be the lead into doing some outreach that Dave will be starting to prepare.
Have the selectmen stated an unqualified support of this program, comprehensive wastewater program?
I would say no.
No. Thank you.
I don't think there's been a discussion that would lead them to a point where they would say yay or nay. And I think it's critical that we get in front of them to see what they like and don't like about where we're going.
So
Hopefully, whatever we put in front of them, we get some feedback, and moving forward from that meeting, we know what we can say that's okay to say and what we should stay away from that they're not gonna like. So, but I don't think there's been any, other than forming the committee, I don't think there's been a lot of discussion recently about anything to do with this program.
So we can't make the blanket statement that the Board of Selectmen would like to see this accomplished.
I
Right,
think
that's-
they would, it's just how would
Yeah,
we accomplish
sure.
it? I think it's gonna, that's what the thing
That's
is.
another qualification.
Well, it's how do we get there is gonna be the question.
Well, you had several meetings that were.
Most of it's I think most of it's gonna center around how we finance it, because that was the sticking point last time this exercise was done, was, how do we pay for it?
I think it's a valid question of like where the selectmen stand in general, like to this idea. I think that'd be worth knowing.
I think it'd be invaluable
Yeah.
for us to proceed. There's a tremendous amount of effort being put into this by many very capable people. And I would hate to see it end up like the last one.
Yeah, and I don't wanna start saying things and say, oh, wait a minute, what I said last month doesn't count now because we talked to selectmen.
Yeah.
And they said something
Good point.
different, so.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's critical that we get to them as quickly as possible, as long as we have some information to give them. Right now, we're basically at here's our phasing idea, here's some of our outreach ideas, but I don't think we've got anything solid on how we're gonna finance it. And then, again, that's gonna be the big question, I believe.
But we do have to do it.
It has to be done, but I don't wanna get too ahead of ourselves where we have to back up and say, well, what we said before isn't so. That's my only concern.
Thank you.
So we haven't, we've talked about a bunch of ideas, but we need to put something together as a draft. Or maybe not even as a draft, just send these ideas to the selectmen of the different ways we could pay for this and see what they like and don't like, and build something from there too. That's the other way to do it. So,
We do have a couple meetings before the 29th, and like I said, I put together a draft agenda. Perhaps I can send it out in advance for discussion at your next meeting. You've had a lot of meetings and you've discussed a lot of topics, so I think the main point of discussion probably would be updating on all the things you've considered and been talking about, that you have been working hard. You did have a recommendation to our consultant in order to have them move forward as to a phase one. Here's what we suggested, here's why. Probably introduce the economic development report at that point, and we'll have some talking points related to that. And then let them know what's coming up. And the big part of that would be outreach, in that you're developing your outreach materials and starting with frequently asked questions, and just so they know, so you go out and they hear that you're talking to people or handing things out, that they're not surprised that.
and
That's
I would
it.
recommend that report go out to them prior to the meeting, not just their Friday or Monday packet, packet, but get it to them, say at least a week in advance, so they've got time to absorb what's in that report. And
Well, where
hopefully
has the final economic report gone?
So we've got that, and it's on the website. I don't know that town admin has ever put that in front of them.
As far as I know, they haven't.
So I can,
That might be something, follow on Kurt's saying, make sure it's at least in their hands.
Because then they get the time to read it and think about what it says and what their questions might be, as opposed to last minute trying to absorb all that information and then figure out what they want to do with it. I think it would be wise to get that at least a week in advance of our meeting time, if not sooner than that. Okay.
One question, Mr. Chairman.
Mhm.
We should probably have some concrete numbers as to what the whole program's gonna cost. And we should also have an array of items that we would use, mechanisms for generating revenue. And maybe even get to the point of being prepared to recommend or at least put those things in front of them so that they have something to know. I mean, the
Well,
economic report, I think, is good, but
No, I agree. I think what we have to do, and here's some of the ideas going around in my head as far as the financing is, that we can't expect phase one to pay for what we're going to do.
Right.
Because they can't afford it. And it's not, the plant is for 4 phases, the pipe is for how many?
8 phases.
All, but the main
No.
trunk line of 28 is
6
not gonna
phases.
pick up 8, right?
No, it's probably 5 or 6 of them.
So somehow, somewhere between 4 phases or 5 or 6 have got to participate in paying for this. And that's, I think, where we've got to figure out how we do it. Obviously, those who use it pay more, But those who are potentially gonna use it should be investing in it now, I believe.
Well, Rich, you talked about a percentage, or I think David talked about a percentage, one of you guys, relative to people that would be getting a phase in the future, but not the initial phase. Is there a way of breaking that down?
Well, you're looking at this is the latest figure based off the last meeting you had. That has the revised phase one on it.
Mhm.
Swan Pond Village and the Nicanello property have been added into it.
Right.
Shows down at South Shore Drive. So in that sort of lighter green color is the current proposed phase one, which we're fine tuning the cost right now. But that in-town solution, that collection system is probably a little under 40 million. And then your treatment plant, if you were building your own treatment plant, you're looking at over $100 million for the whole phase one, which, as Kurt said, serves more than phase one, but because you're building the spine of the system, that other, everything south of that feeds in, and
Something north of it.
essentially north from Buck Island Road, south anyway, feeds into it, and then it goes to the treatment plant.
But what's the startup figure for phase one to get rolling? What have you determined?
Right now, you're looking at over $100 million.
Okay.
Plant
In
and
the
then-
Yarmouth only solution.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's only.
Well,
Okay.
we want the
Tri-Town.
tri-town.
We've just gotten the Yarmouth costs that we're raising up, so now we can do the DHY costs. Without that third leg of the stool, we couldn't have do the DHY costs.
Gotcha.
DHY is in the works.
So we hope to have that by January 4th.
And hopefully, we have another meeting Friday on DHY, which I would hope things should be pretty well settled by then. And it doesn't seem like there's been a lot more questions lately as far as, or concerns as to the agreement.
Yeah, actually, we had a very positive meeting in Dennis last week on it, on reviewing the agreement. Couple nuances, but we'll discuss those at the meeting on Friday. But yeah, I think we're getting very close.
So I think some of the key things obviously is the phase one piping costs
Mhm.
for us, then the DHY costs, which are the force mains in the plant. And then we also have to talk about the date that the plant is expected to go online, because you have to have something to go into the plant.
Well, that's why we're bumping all the costs up to the year 2022, which would be potentially the midpoint of construction for you to start your first phase of sewer construction.
So when do you think the plant should be online? 24?
Probably 24, 25,
That's
yeah,
the goal
because
right now.
you're looking at a 3 plus or minus year construction phase. So- And then you gotta hook everybody up to then start the wastewater going.
Because I also have a personal feeling that, and I think that economic impact study shows that if we commit to this and we get all the approvals, that I think you'll see development happen to time in with the start of the system. I think people start to do something with an end goal of saying, okay, in 25, I can put the pipe right to the street and not have to worry about a septic system. I really have a strong feeling that things like that are going to be happening.
Oh, I wouldn't disagree, because when we were designing the west end from Parker's River to Barnstable, we had developers stopping in our office, asking what elevation they could tie into.
Right.
So,
And again, we
Absolutely.
all, I won't say we all, but many people know of instances of developments that have come looking around town and walked away as soon as they found out there was no wastewater. It seems to be the key sticking point for anything happening right now. I know Open Cape is a second piece of it, but that's not up for us to worry about. Somebody else is hopefully trying to get that squared away also.
So you're saying by January 4th, you would have the two alternatives
yes,
and the numbers for that?
yeah, because you need to have your in-town solution in order to be able to compare that to joining the DHY partnership.
Right, so if we said, if we.
And the third component for you is we're also still pushing forward with the Barnstable option.
Which is not gonna be resolved by,
We're not sure we'll have that fully done by the 4th, but
It would be
We're
soon
pushing.
after the 4th.
Yeah.
So you'd be able to compare all three.
But they are receptive. Barnstable.
oh yes,
Oh, yeah, they need us as much as we need them. It sounds like anyways.
they actually need you more than you need.
so would you also have, the difference in cost between going to Barnstable versus going to the Dennis Harwich system? Would you be able to?
Mean with all
Compare
the flow?
two.
No.
For Lewis
No,
Bay.
we're just talking Lewis Bay flow.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that is the option. We're
We would
sending
have
your wastewater from the Lewis Bay watershed to Barnstable, which is a little over 300,000 gallons.
Yeah.
And then bringing back 1.2 million gallons of effluent to Buck Island Road.
Right. But the difference in cost between going to Barnstable versus going to, the Tri-Town,
We would have that.
right? I mean, the selectmen would probably want to know that. Maybe the cost is a wash, or maybe there's not much difference in cost, I don't know. You have the cost of the system, but then there's also cost for treatment and, you know.
Right.
There'll probably be some credit for disposal if we're taking
What's it gonna
Barnstable
cost Yarmouth
product
to,
back.
That's going to be the big unknown.
Yeah.
Mhm. Where's the balance? And I would also think it raises another question, which I think we touched on a little bit, but if you put that extra flow into what I guess would probably be Parkers River watershed.
Yep.
Do we have to look at how much more we have to
You're
remove
exactly right.
from that watershed at the
Right,
same
because it still
time?
has 3 parts of nitrogen. Well, actually, Dennis is, Barnstable's permit, they treat down to 6 parts of nitrogen. So that 6 parts at 1,000,000 gallons, plus or minus, we have to account for that additional sewering, which will be a cost that you'd have to offset towards the Barnstable solution.
So that would be us trying to pressure Barnstable, hopefully to kick in more to help. with
That would be part of their share for having it.
Yeah, okay.
Wouldn't that be part of the agreement?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think so.
absolutely.
yeah, but I guess in the final analysis, Yarmouth wants to know if it's gonna cost us more money,
Oh, absolutely.
you know, or we're gonna make out on the deal with Barnstable.
Sure.
Maybe it's a better deal.
Exactly, yeah, those are the questions that have to be asked. Because as it is now, if we go to Dennis, you're going to Dennis and you're gonna dispose in Dennis. You go to Barnstable, you're taking our product back plus a bunch of theirs. There's, hopefully there's a balance there that will have cost benefits to Yarmouth.
Right.
They would have to have, otherwise I'm not really sure it's worth doing it that way.
Yeah, just to be clear, when you bring your wastewater to Dennis for treatment, the effluent goes back to all 3 towns ultimately.
Eventually, right.
The first primary site, well, there's 2 sites in the initial treatment plant. One, there's a small site for some flow in Dennis at that treatment plant site, but the larger flow would be is targeted at your Bass River Golf Course site.
So the Highlands and Pines aren't number 2. Bass River would probably be the number 2 site to go to.
Yes,
It's tied
Okay.
with number 1.
yeah, we would build a small effluent recharge site at the treatment plant site itself in Dennis.
Yeah.
But that Swan Pond watershed has very limited nitrogen. So to put in, it's 100% septic system nitrogen removal. So anything you put in, you got to come up with something else to take out that remaining 3 parts.
You're talking about Dennis and Swan Pond?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So the vast majority of that effluent would be pumped back to the
Has
Bass
come out of
River
that
Golf
watershed
Course.
anyways.
The site after that would then go to Harwich at their DPW site. So we don't get up into the sites in northern Dennis, one off Crowell Road at Old Bass River Road,
Mhm.
and then up to the Highlands and Dennis Pines
Way down there.
after the road. Yes.
Okay.
Now, when you bring effluent back from Barnstable, it's strictly going to the DPW site? Or is it, or you
To the Buck Island Road site, yes.
To the Buck Island Road site. You're not anticipating sending any to our other golf course or anyplace else?
Sending it to Bayberry Hills hasn't been put on the table yet, but
Yeah, so at this time, we haven't considered that. It's not,
I mean, you're taking almost, 900,000 or almost 1 million gallons back.
Right.
From Barnstable.
Right.
That's not ours, it's theirs. And, is the site at Buck Island Road big enough to take that?
right now we're very comfortable. It can take 1.2 million gallons. After we get it up and running, some of the modeling has shown that you might be able to get up to 2 million gallons, but we would have to do some monitoring to make sure you can get that high. But there's nothing to say you couldn't put a well in even there and pump back in the force main that already connects from your septic treatment plant down to the Buck Island Road site and pump it back the other way and use that as the irrigation source water at Bayberry. But you're trying to use that already effluent from your septic treatment plant, which will still remain. That's where that effluent goes now.
yeah, that's something that certainly could be on the table. Our discussions with Barnstable have been just about the Buck Island site, but certainly if that's of interest and Barnstable says, hey, we need to dispose of 4 million gallons a day, we need to start looking for the spots, but they haven't necessarily made that, volume claim yet. We're still in the very early stages of discussion with them.
So we have something to sell, maybe?
We do.
It's possible. The other question I had about outreach too is, we as a committee don't really have a budget, but does the staff have access to money to create materials?
Yes, there's a portion of the wastewater funds that have been approved each of the last few years that have been held for outreach purposes
Okay.
and has not been expended.
So if we want to print something nice, we can do that. Or
Absolutely.
once we get to the point where we have the information we
Right,
can put in it.
Absolutely.
Okay. That was my question.
Did you want to take a minute and walk through these questions, or do
Yeah, we seem
people
to be
have a
getting
chance to
away
look
from
at
this. I'd
them?
like
Or
let's do all the questions first.
I mean, the first question is, what is the purpose of this project? That's pretty generic. I think that's one that relates to Yarmouth. Who's involved in the project? We can shorten that if you want, or leave it similar to what's there, but, it just, the intent there was to explain that, there's been a lot of people involved in this project. It didn't happen overnight. It's been third-party peer reviewed. It's pretty extensive. A lot of people hear about, the acronym MEP. What is MEP? So we just tried to explain that because that's really been what's determined the amount of nitrogen in each of the watersheds that needs to be removed. That's the basis, those reports. Why is nitrogen the issue? Again, explaining why nitrogen, freshwater ponds, it's phosphorus, saltwater, it's nitrogen. So that's an education piece. Will this plan result in sewers for the entire town of Yarmouth? We go in and, explain that, you're going to have roughly 12,000 parcels on sewer, but clearly not the whole town is going to be on sewer. And explain why. Answer the question, we pump our septic system as required and have no problems. Why can't this continue, type of thing? And at the beaches and harbors, pretty good as is. Go on to explain they need to keep doing that if they're not going to be on a sewer, but why that doesn't work for the others because it's not removing nitrogen. Why does Yarmouth have to do this? Explain, where things are, that you've got the TMDLs that have been issued for all your watersheds now, and you have to implement a plan that will meet those. We've heard that solving our wastewater problem will cost tens of millions of dollars. Is that true? Go on and explain where you are with your cost and why you're spreading it over that 40-year period to help with your finances. So I think certainly all the questions on the first page do relate. Question 9, if impacts are affecting estuaries, are our groundwater wells protected? You've had 2 or 3 wells that have shown impacts. I think it's well 5 and 11.
It's
Or
4 and 5. It's
4 and
at
5.
Near Captain's Village.
You look at where they're located and you see the density of development around there, you know why they've been impacted. So we can go on to explain that in there and customize that certainly for Yarmouth.
Can I just say something about that, Dave? Because we're a single source aquifer, the entire aquifer is being impacted.
Mhm.
It's just that it's not showing up in the concentrations in the rest of the aquifer. Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah, you raise a good point, Lee. Where that really comes into play is with the contaminants of emerging concern. And so that actually plays into an argument for centralized treatment as well, because that way you can treat and remove, whatever the next item is going to be beyond nitrogen. And there's been a lot of studies, a lot of testing, monitoring going on to try to determine what that will be. Right now, the issue is nitrogen that you're trying to deal with. So typically, if you see in a groundwater well, anything over 1 part of nitrogen, it's being impacted because background is pretty much considered to be less than 1 part. Those wells 4 and 5, there's a plot in your comprehensive wastewater management plan that shows a steady increase over the last 30 years. And they're up over 5. So
I guess what I'm saying is maybe we should somewhere along the way expand the issue to include things.
Yep. About the sole source aquifer.
Prescription drugs and whatever else people throw down the drain,
Okay.
But you say that nitrogen does play a significant part. Does nitrogen play a significant part in the aquifer?
It does to a certain degree. If it's showing up in specific wells that you're using for drinking water and it's above 1 part, then yes. If it's less than 1 part, or if it's just in the groundwater at less than 1 part, then
My thought, perhaps going along with Lee, is that we should not minimize the harmful potential effect of nitrogen entering the aquifer.
That's our primary.
It's all we got.
Well, it's our primary constituent right now, but as everybody knows, as time goes on, our society is getting more complicated with all these chemicals and all of these drugs and everything else.
Here's the comparison. The drinking water standard for nitrogen is 10 parts.
Right.
So the Cape Cod Commission guideline is they like to see 5 parts or less. The criteria we're trying to meet out in your estuaries is 0.5 or less. So there's a 10-fold difference about what we can all drink and what a healthy environment is in your estuary. So that's the comparison, and that's the levels we're trying to get to. So yes, you can be 1 to 5 parts, and you and I can drink it, no problem. But by the time it gets to that estuary, it has to be less than 0.5, or it's degrading your water quality, killing the living organisms there.
Affecting the lower food chain.
So it dilutes in the groundwater, and by the time it gets there, if it's not still less than that, then you've got an issue.
Yeah.
What is the timeline for the project? Obviously we'll have to come up with what we feel is the appropriate answer here going forward for that. But, that's where we just explain, this isn't going to be done in a 5-year period. This is being spread out over 40 years to try to minimize your financial impacts. As a Yarmouth property owner, will my property value be decreased? And the answer in there is, unless something is done to mitigate the water quality issues that are occurring, it conceivably will be decreased. Isn't wastewater a single Cape-wide problem, which requires a single Cape-wide solution? Well, this is where we can customize that a little bit to say you are working with, the DHY, Clean Waters Partnership. You're working potentially with Barnstable, and, so you are looking to try and solve it on a watershed basis. It's not a town line, property line based issue. I skipped one. As a Yarmouth resident, what can I do to reduce my nitrogen contribution? That's where we can get into the stormwater and fertilizer use aspects, because that's often a question. Every homeowner stands up at just about every community meeting and says, what can I do to mitigate my nitrogen? So those are our two things, and we can't forget about, even though they're in the 7 to 8% range of contributing, that adds up to 15%, and if we can get those down, it's only going to help you. So don't put the rain leader from your gutters under the driveway and have it run out into the nearest stream that leads to an estuary. Put it off into the vegetated swale, so you use the nitrogen. Can wastewater just be piped out into the ocean like in Boston? That's the ocean outfall issue. Pretty much the same answer here. What are we doing to minimize the cost of this project?
Yeah, but Dave, on that, wouldn't just say, well, it still has to be treated and collected, which is the major cost of the program. So how it's
That's
disposed
true.
of is, something that's
Yep.
part of the program. But, I think on that particular one, that's a focus on disposal, but not collection and treatment, which are the bigger pieces.
Yep. Good point.
Just a comment.
What are we doing to minimize the cost for this project? Again, I think we can answer that with, you're looking to partner with adjacent communities, as well as you've gone through to try to develop what you folks feel is the most cost-effective solution to even put forth and be implementing. And we'll constantly, as you implement each phase, be looking at, is this still the most cost-effective option, or is something else come about? Will wastewater treatment lead to explosive growth and development, including condominium developments, large apartment complexes, on and on? I think we can even respin that a little bit to and maybe reference your economic study to help address that. That right now, zoning is what controls your growth.
Excuse me.
But here's an economic study that says you're missing out on growth that your current zoning
Allows.
could be allowing. So, and maybe get into, you can give us the numbers of, over the years, your tax rate impact has shifted from commercial being X% to over onto the residential side.
Well, the other thing too, this is a point, is that we can compete with surrounding communities if we have a system. And that competition, if we can generate some smart growth, will reduce the burden to the residential tax base.
Mhm.
Has the potential. I think that's an important point.
Yeah,
That's like saying to the residents, look, right now, because you don't have a sewer system, you're picking up more of the tax burden to run this town. But in reality, if we had the sewer system and we could offer this to commercial operations, we could turn that around.
Yeah, and that's also a way of answering the next question. What will happen if the town decides not to fund the implementation of the wastewater program? The residential component will continue to go up. You're going to fund more of it.
You gotta pay one way or the other.
So, because those commercial establishments won't be able to exist. So we can certainly work on the customized answer for Yarmouth on that one as well. So what I did is I went and looked at the list of questions that Richard put together from all you folks. And in one form or another, I had that questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 13, and 16 were one form or another answered here. So we need to work on the cost when you develop your cost recovery program. But I would suggest that instead of actually putting that in here, that actually be a separate brochure, because that's going to be, sort of brochure number one that people want to know. So that takes up a lot of the other questions that I didn't just label off, such as, explain what a betterment is, are grants available, the questions about will bring more development and traffic. Maybe we can work that into some of the answers in these others. I'm a part-time resident. Do I have to pay? That's part of the cost recovery. I'm a renter. How does this impact me? That's part of the cost recovery. I'm not going to touch the DY school district question. I'll let you guys answer that and we'll put it out.
Dave, did you contemplate at some point, once we get through this process of DHY, having something on DHY? What is DHY?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that would be an appropriate place.
Yeah.
You might not overtly mention it within that, but
We take it for granted, but that's a great point.
Yeah, no, as part of the grant that you folks are the lead on, but it's for all 3 towns to evaluate the DHY Clean Waters Community Partnership. We will be generating the cost summary and, the education materials that each of the 3 towns will be using for that. That describes what it is, how it would work, summarizing the agreement. and
so I
those
would
things.
think that would accommodate that question there.
Yes.
and
Yep.
Be obvious, because
No, I was
presumably
referring-
it'd be, when we evaluate our options as to cost, that would be clear by looking at that.
I was referring to the 3rd word in that question, which even got capitalized. So I think the vast majority, if you're good with this, we'll try to draft this for your next meeting.
One thought, the tone that this is written in states that this project is happening, and given that the townspeople have to vote to make this a real deal, perhaps it should state proposed project rather than project and things of that nature.
That's up for you folks to let us know.
I agree with that. And I also think someone who is very unfamiliar with a wastewater system should review a draft. At the end of the day, it's going to be about votes, and a vote from a person who knows much more than anyone in this room about systems is just as valuable as a vote from someone who knows nothing. And if we don't bring along, if you will, the people that are on one end of the bell curve who don't know much about this, we're hurting ourselves in the context of getting to the goal line. So no real presumptive knowledge. Because sometimes when people get involved in something, the level of knowledge within a given group about a given problem keeps going up and up. But all those folks outside the room, they're not here to participate in the discussions, and some of them don't read very much.
So don't go on websites.
Right. So what they do get exposed to, it's better that it be a little rudimentary than it be too sophisticated.
Basic plain language.
Yeah, any way to reduce acronyms?
Yep.
A
Or at least
plus.
explain them. It was my next suggestion, that, you know, CWMP and MEP and things like that get defined just, here's a page. So when I start reading the rest of this, I can follow along with what those acronyms do mean, because I know they're not gonna go away. You know, if you try not to have acronyms, you're gonna have 3 pages become 6 pages just because you have to spell it out every time.
Yeah,
It
no, I
makes
think
it
we've tried to
unreadable.
do that, but certainly we're open to further input on that. We've tried to be conscious.
I mean, do you have to like, I mean, each time with like CWMPs, like, can you just say plans? Or is that too general? You know, like in each case, like that reduces a lot of acronyms throughout. Geez, what does
Either that or you could put-
TMDL mean? Total maximum. I mean, can you just say load for the embayment? I mean, I don't know. Again, like for most people reading that, they read that and they're just like, yeah, glaze over.
If you spelled it out in parentheses within the same sentence, it would be an easy read, and people would understand what you're trying to convey.
Right, but you're repeating the same acronym many times, so after a while, it would like again, it would take up a lot more space, and yeah, it's a tricky thing.
Again, I just think if you made a page and it had all those defined, it'd be a huge start. And people could follow along better as they're reading whatever it is they're reading.
If you were gonna use this as a one-page thing,
Or like a box in the bottom or something like that, maybe with a legend.
I think a legend would be appropriate.
it's kind of dull. I mean, you know, it's all words.
Yeah,
Well, yeah.
I Xerox these out of,
That's one page out of a whole.
The brochure.
template.
Yeah, this would
Out
just
of a
be
What I'm
like,
12-page
saying
brochure.
is, If you
for
wanted,
talking purposes tonight.
if you wanted to use this as like a handout, a 2-page handout or something,
I would recommend jazzing it up a little bit, put some pictures. of color.
Well, you're leading into my next question of if we wanted to add in photos, which I'm fully, as you can see, that's what most of these are.
I think that would work.
Which questions would you eliminate? Because you can't, otherwise you're into a 4-page
Yeah,
brochure.
yeah, it's-
So in order to create space, we can try to cut down some text on the questions, but more importantly, if you had to eliminate 4 questions, we'd welcome input on what those 4 questions,
I was gonna ask,
or try to combine them.
we have a handout that's on the website now, that says, why are we doing this? And I don't know, Dave, if the questions that answers, you maybe perhaps could eliminate from this. You need to have.
Okay, we'll double check that. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And to the extent you have more questions, again, if we had depending on how they're receiving it, if it's a piece of paper, it would just be a link, they'd have to go and type it in, but we could also put more frequently asked questions on the website. And for more information, go here. So things that you can't cover on this, we could cover on the website.
I think another important question to be answered is, especially for the seniors, is the breaks that they can get on their taxes. The different programs are out there to help reduce their tax burden a little bit.
Well, that's what I mean. That would
I think
probably be
that's
part of your
important.
cost brochure.
I think that needs to be set at the same time anything else does as far as costs go. So that those who are truly on a fixed income and would love to help but can't, won't feel so bad about the choice they have to make if they feel there's some relief for them. And not just this one subject, but all the ones that are facing the town.
what would be the
I
time
don't think
difference?
it's talked about enough.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, what would be the time difference between when, say, this like original kind of brochure, like info sheet would come out, and the like cost plan information?
Well, I'm thinking this is something we can do in the next couple of weeks. Your cost plan is gonna take minimum a month, if not longer.
Okay, so then I think we really need to make sure that we spell out in this too that like that when the cost will be coming, because that's going to be the number one thing that people are asking about, right?
Yep.
To your point, you're talking the tense of this, or the perspective of this is, here's what we're thinking about doing, not that it's done. And that, so something to the effect of, we're working on our cost proposal and we'll be providing this later or
Yeah.
something. Check this website for updates.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think we could set a lot of the tents too in sort of the preamble paragraph up front, just letting people know where you are in the process. And we always put dates on these so that if you do later versions, they know what date that's from and those types of things.
I think, maybe explaining the Pockets River Bridge project is actually part of this, as was the widening of the bridge for the bike path on Bass River too. The point of that was
Yep.
to help with some of the flushing as part of this plan.
It goes to your question 15, really. Mr. Chairman, I guess the only piece I would add is, now Dave's gone through that, you'll have some materials that you can actually start talking about, and we do currently have the why we are doing this handout, which leads me to, I talked to the Cape Media Center and the company to pursue doing some video with them. But I want to open up to the committee, see if anybody was excited to be a volunteer, or should I poll our staff and get some willing participants, or how would the group like to proceed on that?
I would think a combination of maybe a committee and staff would be a good way to do this. Just my thought. I don't. Sometimes when staff speaks, it's like the inside job, and sometimes when the volunteers speak, well, maybe they're missing a few points that a staff member could back them up on. But I tend, in my experience in watching these kind of things, I think if it's a combination of staff and the board members, it tends to work better.
So which board members would be willing, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I volunteered to participate.
I think the other thing too, maybe as we move forward, if we have different videos with different subjects, we may have board members who are better at it than others. And maybe it fits their level of experience and knowledge better than another person.
It's a good idea.
So I just wanted that, just contemplating an initial, why are we doing this, and like something we can put on YouTube or on Facebook and on the website. People can get a quick introduction to it. It's kind of what we're.
Another thing in general, not just applying to the town of Yarmouth, and I don't know how the other towns have thought about this or receive it, but what if we did a video that involves, say, DEP person or persons to explain from the state's level why we're doing what we're doing, or maybe even from the gentleman who did the studies,
The economic
the
studies.
SMAST, right?
Oh, Brian House.
Brian House.
Oh, the MEP studies.
MEP studies. Just a thought, maybe that could be something that could be used across the various towns, not just Yarmouth. Would have to maybe not directly involve the committee volunteers, but, or it could.
Are you aware of anybody, Dave, that's been used in other communities for?
No,
I was thinking Brian Dudley, because I know he lives locally, but other than that, I don't know if he's the person, or if he could suggest the person would be good.
Well,
Talk about
as
that.
I think we actually had the commissioner come down at the last DHY meeting, 3-town meeting, back in March. Marty Suberg.
Yeah.
And he's been willing to come down and, he read his statement and everything, but he's been willing to come down and help as needed. Yeah, Brian lives in town, but he has to go get approval and what everything he says.
That's fine,
and blah, blah, blah. So,
if
yeah.
if the top dog wants to do it, that's even better.
So, and that was actually brought up by Dan at a recent meeting too,
So
maybe trying to get him
make
back
that
down
happen.
at some point.
Set that up with the media center.
Yep.
Find a time to do it. I wouldn't put him on the spot by himself necessarily, but I think somebody from the state. speaking-
Yeah, no, I've always found it's good if you do, like you said, have a mix of people. Otherwise, it comes across as just whoever that person is and gets linked to who they're representing.
Panel, that's better. How about somebody who was involved with the Donahue report?
Yeah, we'd have to probably go back and have them, pay them to come down and do that, but at
That's
this
almost
point.
its own
but-
subject,
Yeah.
but it's, obviously it ties into what we're trying to do.
It was a damn good report too.
Yeah, it was. Kind of told me what we already thought we knew.
Yeah,
I don't know about you, that's how I
Just
look at it.
verified it.
Yeah, I think a summary of the bullets and stuff could be worked into one of the panels and flash it up there, and it's on the website. So, does the person that actually did it have to come down, particularly if they're just summarizing that report? If they were given a report on, the economy of Cape Cod and a bunch of other things, that might be different. But if it's just to talk about that study, I think I think we all worked with them and did a pretty good job on getting the executive summary done. And then we had talked about, sort of doing the one pager of even summarizing those bullets and having that available too.
Yeah, because there are highlights of that I think if we picked them out and made a sheet out of that, also it would be huge. Because again, I believe we're gonna come up with a cost recovery plan with the help of selectmen, obviously. But I also believe that there could be such a new growth that we could potentially tap into that new growth to help pay for some of this and further ease the burden on everybody who's participating in this. But time will tell if that happens. And then, of course, that would be a selectmen's policy decision if they want to commit some of that money to future sewer expansion or even paying for the existing.
Yeah, Sandwich did those, like a series of videos recently. I think I mentioned that previously. Their focus was to keep them very short. So I don't know what the thoughts are relative to the media center and how long they would be, but
Yeah.
we're like in the 4-minute time range. I mean, you would want things that people will click on or watch and not glaze over, not get disinterested. So it could be relatively short. So it's not a ton of information.
So that could be more like a YouTube video as opposed to a media center, public television type of program, which
Right, versus
I
a
think
full
there's
program,
certain-
right.
I think there's certain process that could certainly take a half an hour program if you get the right people to sit down and discuss whatever the issue is. But at the same time, I agree with you, where people's, I don't want to say that a short attention span, but their ability to sit down and watch things like this is not unlimited, so that if you get little bites of it, they can look at that and absorb it.
Right, and
That
maybe
was
it
my-
warrants one longer presentation for more topics, but Sandwich was absolutely convinced that it had to be short.
Yeah, if it's an informational type video that pretty well accepted in the industry, that you don't want to go over 7 to 8 minutes. So they tend to be on that shorter version. But if you're having a panel discussion or, something like that, you can go longer, but, you're going to cover a lot more topics. It's not.
Yeah.
That'd be more like
Single
a
topic
public
oriented.
meeting that we
Yeah.
videotaped
I
and
was
then,
gonna say, you tie that in with an audience, and then you have a participation that way also.
Yeah.
the video I was mentioning for just to getting acquainted with what we're doing was, I guess, thinking about 1 minute to 2 minutes, just to get something out there, get people the awareness that
We're doing something.
the machinery's in the books.
Is there a place on the public access channels that show up every once in a while, say, wastewater planning is in progress, and here's the website
I can
address
create-
and things
Yeah,
like that?
well, that's, it's kind of been waiting on a lot of things to get to a certain point, and we're just about at that point, I think, especially if we're gonna start updating the selectmen. I didn't want to get too much out there, but
Right.
getting ahead of the selectmen, so that's why I think the update was important,
'Cause I
But
think
yeah, we can put up slides on the bulletin board, and then if we actually had programming, we could put programming up too.
I think, directing people there and encouraging them to ask questions so that as we do our outreach, we know what people are really concerned about. We're not going the wrong direction either. We obviously know it's gonna be money, but, you know, what other issues are people really interested in knowing the answers to?
Just post them on Channel 18. I'll tell you, a lot of people watch that.
Yeah.
Get information from it. Just have bullet points.
Mhm.
Get them to start thinking.
Okay, we pretty well touched on outreach for tonight. I think we have some direction for everybody to go and work on. We're gonna build out analysis.
So on the build-out analysis, we're still trying to validate some data. Hopefully Karen and I will get together tomorrow and figure that piece out so we can move forward on a more comprehensive approach. That being said, I spoke to Karen this afternoon, and you know, she feels okay taking the prior effort that was done and updating that to get moving on it, so that we can, and then we can follow through with once we get our data validated with a relook at it. But we can go forward with what we had, because that was using basically flows for average houses, and there was only a limited number of parcels that had a significant amount of flow that we wanted to add a surplus perhaps to that. So I'm not sure what our timing is with the holiday next week, but that was her approach, was to move forward on the prior effort and update that. And at the same time, once we get our data validated, we take another look at it. And that's important too, also for the cost recovery. So I need that data. I'll just roll into the next item if you don't mind. That data that we want to match up by parcel, particularly the water flows, would influence the level of betterment. And so let me just summarize a few things that we had talked about on cost recovery. There's some things that we can do now, and then there's some things that we can't. And so one of the things that are off into the future, a significant, just having been through this effort the last time, a significant contribution to our funding plan would be a surcharge, capital surcharge on an operating rate. And the reason I mentioned that first is it's a big part of our cost recovery plan, but if as Dave says, it's 2025 before people are connected, well, it's not going to be available until we start charging people an operating rate, and then we cover add costs on top of that. So we'll need funding up front. So I'm starting at the end kind of, and now I'm coming back to the very beginning. One of the things we'll have to think about and begin discussing with the selectmen in the near term would be setting aside capital to almost like seed capital to fund this, because we're not going to have all the funding sources in place up front to pay for everything, or perhaps we won't, depending on some of the choices that get made. So that might be a combination of setting aside whatever remaining debt drop off that we have. If we have any excess free cash that goes unspent, maybe putting it in a pot for that, for wastewater, so that by the time we start, we have some money in the till that can help finance the project, get it started. So what are the things, however, that are kind of on the table for current funding at the beginning of the project? And that's kind of where I see the plan starting once we start discussing it in more detail. And that includes two things that we need to talk about. The Water Infrastructure Fund and betterments. So on the Water Infrastructure Fund, we don't need a decision tonight, but and we kind of need to get more data to start generating what the costs and the debt service requirements are. But certainly I can foresee that that is one of the key elements to funding this, because it's something we can do either at the time that we need the money, we're incurring the costs, or if not, a little bit earlier, so we can build up some of those funds. And the key decision points I think the committee needs to think about, and might be one of the questions we leave the selectmen with on an update, would be what's the approach? Would you like town meeting to adopt the Water Infrastructure Fund and not assign anything to it yet, but just have it? Do you want to start with 1%? I'm just, talking out loud, talking this through. What if you voted at this May or in this upcoming fall town meeting to do a wastewater infrastructure fund with 1% and didn't change CPA. Because I don't know if the wastewater committee wants to get into recommending what CPA ought to do with their 3% that they're currently getting. Maybe that's a decision for the selectmen. But certainly I think we can see that there's a need for a wastewater infrastructure fund. And the question is, we can do up to 3% similar to CPA, or we can do anything in between 0 and 3%. So you could start now early with a fraction of a percent or 1% and build it up to 2 or 3% in the future. And that could be tied to a reduction in CPA, but that's really your recommendation to the selectmen of what that approach ought to be. And, I'd leave it to you guys to figure out whether you should be making those recommendations. It seems to me that, you're the Water Resources Committee, and then you've got the CPC Committee, and then you've got the selectmen. And each of them, I'm sure, has their own viewpoint as to what should happen with those funds. So that is a discussion point that I think we'll need some feedback on. I guess my suggestion would be, as I'm looking at this, I'd be looking at an early adoption of the wastewater fund pegged at a lower percentage than what you might end up at, with a subsequent, once the plan gets rolling, add to that. What I don't know, that's what the politicians need to hash out, is what does that do to CPA? So.
A couple of meetings ago, I mentioned the water rates that we pay in Yarmouth. And I think you might have tied that in with the overall wastewater fund. But if you look at it, I'm going back maybe 32, 34 years. It's been $21 a quarter, 4 payments a year. And the usage is extremely low for water. Water is a very valuable asset. Look at the potential there for raising funds as one of your alternative measures that we're talking about.
So the issue that we would have with that, and Jeff and Dave, please chime in if you have any insight. So when you set a fee for something in municipal government, the fee's got to be based on the cost of providing that service.
Okay,
You cannot generate additional surplus for a service if you don't really need it to cover that cost, because the courts have ruled that otherwise that is essentially just an additional tax.
Mhm.
And that's more properly reflected on a tax rate.
but isn't there a way of tying in wastewater resource relative to what we're trying to accomplish through actual water?
So
Wouldn't that be looked at as a addendum to
I think
water resource?
ultimately what we may end up doing, and I'd have to flesh this out with Jeff a little bit in town administration. We've already broached the subject, but ultimately, right now we've got a separate, it's called a water surplus fund. So it has certain provisions of general law that provide for it. And we're envisioning perhaps having a water resources enterprise fund. So it would encompass everything.
Okay,
And there would be a water rate, and there would be a sewer rate, and maybe a stormwater rate, or whatever other rates it might be for certain costs incurred by that fund. But the underlying principle is the water rate's got to cover the water costs, and the sewer rate's got to cover the sewer costs.
I see.
That service in which the fee is
Yeah.
related
Right.
to. So
Yeah.
there is some flexibility, like Rich said, when you combine those entities, but it still has to pass the straight face test relative to supporting the service that the fee is attached to. If that
Gotcha.
makes sense.
Gotcha.
But definitely in that initial stage where we don't have the capital up front, I think we might be looking to the water fund to help support those appropriations that we'll be doing for planning.
I got a question for you, Jeff. In the future, looking at the structure of our maintenance people, you've got a unit called the water department, right?
Water division, right?
Water
Yes.
division.
Yep.
And are you anticipating that this is going to be a water and wastewater unit division? Or And are you gonna be, I mean, some of the personnel that are working in water will be working in the wastewater. I mean, you're gonna need maintainers for these pump stations and, you know, making sure these generators are operating properly when power goes down and things like that. It's gonna be a substantial investment in equipment and manpower, and you're gonna have to build a bigger organization. And I'm assuming that you might put the water and the wastewater people together and house them in one location.
Well, all of that is currently being considered as far as what that might look like. We actually have a general manager that's been brought on within the last few months. He's actually started October 1st. He's a contract operations individual from Weston and Sampson. But one of the tasks of that position, working closely with myself, is to determine what that future structure might look like. There's a couple of different models that could be. It could be contract ops for wastewater, similar to what we have for our septic facility. It could build off that kind of model. Or it could be more of a traditional municipal operations as we do with water, which is staffed by town employees. You know, those are things we still need to work through, and that is related to, you know, the timing of the program, you know, what that looks like. All those things are still on the table and are actively being considered and what might be the best way to go. We recently being earlier this year, our water superintendent, Dan Mills, longtime water superintendent, retired. And so rather than just simply filling that position as a water superintendent, we decided that we're in a period of transition here. What is that going to look like? That's the whole genesis of why we brought, and the selectmen supported, bringing a general manager on. And actually, that position is general manager for water, wastewater operations. And so we're already thinking about that, and that general manager position is considered short-term as well. It's a contract we have with Weston Sampson for 1 year with the potential to extend for another year. And that is all because we're in a transition period. We just don't know. We're really figuring it out. It's one of those things that in the military they used to say, you're building the airplane while it's in flight. You know, we're just kind of, you know, figuring out as we go. We need to continue operations for water while planning for the future with regard to wastewater. And what that looks like, we want to be flexible, and that and we're just working through what that looks like right now. So yes, we need to have that support, but it could look like I said, municipal operations, or it could look like contract operations, and that's to be determined. And that is primarily going to be responsible for our collection system, because remember, on the DHY, that is going to be a district that will have its own support infrastructure, if you will. So how that works with that is also something we need to consider as well.
So that's a good example of how that water rates might support efforts through
Good.
wastewater, right? So we've got a joint, right now being paid out of a water rate, even though he's a general manager for both functions. But as far as raising water rates to pay debt service on a wastewater treatment facility, for example, probably is not something we can do. However, that is what we're suggesting with the capital surcharge. We're going to have a sewer rate, similar like you have a water rate, and we want to add a certain percentage as a capital surcharge to generate the funds to pay for the debt. So the operating the rate for sewer would pay the operating costs plus an extra percentage, say 25%, that we can set aside. That would be enough to not only pay the operations but also pay the capital debt service. But that's 2025, 2026 revenue source. The Water Infrastructure Fund and how that interplays with the CPA is a decision we need to make, you know, in the near term, or a recommendation, I should say.
Well, the staff has already used that as a model
Right.
towards cost recovery, correct?
It was in the last effort, and it was supported by the selectmen at that time. I would imagine, it would be supported now. And now it actually also has at least two anyway, right? Harwich and Sandwich people that have implemented and voted on them.
Yeah, it's recommended in Howard. They haven't actually gone through the implementation, and it's recommended in Dennis as well.
Yeah, because a change in the land, well, what was the land bank and it became CPA?
Right.
I believe that 2020 is the date that you can make that option.
So, that date is coming up, and, my recommendation when I get around to a more complete cost recovery plan would be adopting it at the, near the beginning of that availability to be adopted. The question is, how much and does it affect the CPA rate? And so.
I imagine it would.
They are two separate things. So in theory, you could have the water, the WIF that covered a certain percentage, and CPA could stay at whatever percentage you'd like that to be. In fact,
That's
I
what
think
Sandwich
in
did.
Sandwich, they actually went from a 3% CPA to their plan, although they haven't made all their milestones yet with implementation, but the direction they're headed is 2% in the water improvement fund, and then 2% in CPA. So going from 3 to actually 4%. And so those percentages are really up to the policymaking boards and recommendations from yourself as far as where you'd like that to go. And so there's been a lot of discussion about transitioning so there's minimal impact to the taxpayer, and that makes a lot of sense. But that really is open for discussion. It doesn't have to be the same 3%. It could be in addition. It could be just a different form of what's currently being paid. There's a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, but is that really our decision, or are we trying to come up with a recommendation based on staff input on what kind of money that is to help fund the first
I think
phase
the
of the
selectmen are
plan?
looking for a recommendation,
But I think we need more information from staff. I think it starts with getting our cost estimates for
Well,
the
we've-
plant
you
in
need a lot
phase
more
one, and
information,
then
absolutely, yeah.
And we've got a big
Right.
variable. The
Right.
big variable being, as I laid out the preliminary, what it might look like a few meetings ago. That was presuming that we'd have an Airbnb tax in place, which isn't.
yeah,
And so 1% might be just fine if that were in place and provided a certain level of funding. But absent that, maybe you need to make up for that as, so now maybe you need 2%. Now, I'm not sure.
What is 1%? What's the value of that?
1.5 million. Is it 1.5 or is that 2%?
No, I think that was, well, we have the numbers out there. We'd have
It
probably.
was 1.5%, I think was 1.5 million is what it was
Annually.
annually. Was the CPA piece.
That was a conservative estimate too, I think.
It was. Seems to me, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Norm Holcomb, mentioned use all of the 3% from CPA for a 10-year period, just to get this wastewater issue off the ground. And that was about 3 weeks ago. I don't know if any of you watched the meeting. But I'm in favor, I've been in favor all along when we first discussed it on the CPA committee, CPC committee. If you look at that percentage, that's going to be taken to put into wastewater. It's going to help all the residents of Yarmouth. And as opposed to selective entities, which are all noble causes, historic, recreation, open space. And I've been on the CPC committee now, I think, probably for about 7-8 years. When I first got on, we were looking at between 24 and 28 applications on a regular basis. Obviously, we wouldn't approve all of them because we didn't have the funding to do that. But as the years went on, then the applications went down because of the work that was being done through the CPA Act. And then what we've noticed in the past 3 to 5 years is it's the same applications coming back for the same entities. So my point is that I think that we've done a tremendous job with the CPA Act in Yarmouth, but by repurposing that money into this water resource effort, again, you're benefiting all of the residents. and not just a selective few.
Do you think the CPC would want to have their voices heard though, as to,
Oh, I'm sure I think I was the only one that felt that way. But it's just a practical approach as I see it, and a logical approach as well.
would be the appropriate persons or board to inquire of the CPC as to their feelings about their level of funding?
Well, I think that the department head probably.
You don't think that's coming from the Board of Selectmen would be? Go
Well,
with that?
yeah, again, we haven't, perhaps this will come up again when we go before them relative to the comments that Chairman Holcomb made. I'm sure they will, but that's where I stand. And I just think that I am so much in favor of benefiting everyone as opposed to what it did originally. And then go back, use it for a term period, and then go back to the original CPA.
So
John,
you,
do you think, I'm sorry,
you go ahead.
John, do you think it'd be appropriate for somebody from the CPC to inform us of their feelings on this? I mean, we're
Sure.
talking about making this kind of a half decision.
We're just
Yeah,
making a
so-
recommendation.
yeah.
that's all.
But I mean, it would give us input from them who have the closest association with the
Sure.
expenditures of funds. Yeah. Gary Ellis might be invited.
I'm sure that they're not, they're probably not willing to give up those funds, but
But
again,
it would be
let's
interesting to
look
hear
at the best
why.
interest of the town. That's the issue.
I wouldn't want to cut them off completely. Give them something.
Yeah, I don't know how it would work for us, if it's a good or bad idea, but I think, say, CPA being 1%, we take 2% and maybe, again, add another percent to it. And to help fund this, it might be a good way to go also. But I think, again, it's another discussion they need to have, a discussion we need to have, the select we need to have, and see where everybody comes to an agreement on that, I guess. Ultimately, it's a selectman's decision, but I would think it'd be a great tool because we can implement it starting next year. And as we need money for the North Main Street work, we need engineering work on the rest of phase one, and we need the Bass River Bridge work, even before we get to the plant. So, times are
And it is part of,
coming short on some of the things we have to take action on.
some of the things I heard the committee members saying over the last couple of meetings was there should be a portion or an amount that everybody's contributing to. And this would be a mechanism where everybody would, real estate taxpayers would be contributing to, and others indirectly by, paying the landlords too. But so that would be a mechanism for everyone to participate versus betterments, which is a second decision point I just want to mention to you. I kind of updated you last time as to the philosophy, and I still have to build that out once I get this data validated. But the real decision point that I see related to that is, do we want this betterment to apply to everyone? And when we say Route 28 and South Shore Drive, I think a lot of us picture, the commercial businesses, and I can craft that just fine. But then I contemplate like those little group of condos or houses that are between a couple of motels in South Shore Drive. And are we really expecting them, or do we want them to participate in a betterment? And obviously, if they do, it has to be a fair basis that applies to everybody. So I'd have to figure that out. But they could, if by virtue of being residential, I could leave them out altogether. So is that a direction that?
Personally, no. I think if we run the pipe down the street, everybody should be on it. And again, I think we know some commercial properties have some issues right now. I see no reason why some of the cottage colonies, whatever type of properties are down there, aren't going to face the same issues. If they have to replace their Title V system, I think we'd be better off to encourage them to tie into the sewers. And I think it might be environmentally and financially beneficial to them to do so.
Right, but the residential houses specifically is what you're wondering?
Yeah, I wasn't saying cutting them out, meaning they're not connecting. I meant, do we want to hit them with a betterment to connect?
I think they should still pay, yeah, I think they should still pay part of it. Obviously, I think there's gotta be a scale to it. Again, you're not gonna have a 2-bedroom condo pay the same as a 40-unit motel.
Right.
I think we kind of maybe tie it to the flows, tie it to.
So I think that's what I'll
counts.
have to do, is I'll have to have a very low, the first equivalent unit or economic unit, whatever you're gonna call it, being that 70,000 gallons per year. Just talking about, for $5,000, you get that. And so the condos and the single-family homes, that's what they're gonna hit, and they're gonna pay the $5,000. The second might cost you $30,000 or, something, we could step it up on that basis. So
But if the betterment is payable over
30 years.
a 30-year term at 0 to 3% interest, that's a better deal than they're gonna get from any bank in the world to help get a system in the ground. If they had, again, look at what it would cost them to replace the septic system. I think what the town could be offering them could be a very fair deal.
Could we look at what other towns
Yeah.
have done with similar situations? Take Plymouth comes to mind. They've had a system for a long time. They have single-family houses right in and amongst the multifamily motels, hotels. And look at 3 or 4 towns that have both, if you will, lodging and homes on the system, and just to learn.
The only
Their
one I'm
experience.
aware of on the Cape is Falmouth, and that was mostly on a residential program, I believe.
Well, Barnstable,
And Barnstable hasn't used betterments, have they?
I think they did in that most recent area they did to the south, but
I'm thinking in terms of how their totality of finances is functioning. In other words, what financial systems did those towns that have already built out a system follow? Betterments may be the way to go, but it'd be interesting to take a look and see what the 3 or 4 towns in the last 20 years have done.
Well, and we also have our neighboring towns and the ones participating in DHY each have cost recovery plans that we're aware of,
Okay.
and they're not pursuing betterments.
yeah, betterments were very popular back in when federal government was paying 90% of the programs. So that the betterments were only spreading 10% of the cost. And oftentimes the sewer programs back then were for high groundwater tables, poor soils, small lots, reasons why a Title V system wouldn't work or had significant waivers. The issue that's flipped now and that you're addressing is nitrogen. And everyone in town is contributing to that nitrogen issue. And that area where sewers are being installed is to address the amount of nitrogen needs to be removed and then do that on the most cost-effective basis. So you'll find that the sewers aren't farther up in the watersheds. They're closer to where we can, the higher density areas. But that doesn't mean someone still living up in a rural part of that watershed isn't contributing the same amount of nitrogen. So if you went online, and I think I've mentioned this before, you can Google, is a home bettered by being on a sewer or not? And it's almost 50-50, the number of articles you can find. So that's why the more recent cost recovery programs have not included betterments. They've done the more everybody in town helps pay, because when you're connected to the sewer, you're also going to pay an operating charge. So that's sort of, they're paying that additional cost. So that either offsets, whether their value goes up or not, they're going to pay that additional cost.
And that's kind of why I brought the question up is, do we want to, not that they won't participate in the hooking up to the sewer, but we want them to participate, the residential, single family homes or condos, to participate in a betterment program. Whereas a large hotel on Route 28 has a clear financial incentive to want to have that. And clearly are contributing more to the issue than a single family home on the north side of town.
But I guess my thing has been, because the last time we didn't have betterments and the whole thing went up in flames. if the selectmen's attitude towards this is different as far as what they think, who should pay what, I'm all right with less betterments than some other method, but I'm kind of going by what happened last time where we didn't have betterments and it was suggested that maybe we should have had. So I'm not saying I don't want betterments to be crippling to whoever's going to be paying them either, but I also agree that everybody's part of the problem. Everybody should be part of the solution, but I don't know where that balance is between the two. And what the selectmen will support as we move forward, because if we don't have a 5-0 vote in support, we're going to be in the same place we were 7 years ago.
So maybe what I'll do then is try to craft one that includes the residential. And maybe a decision point might be, we realize that it might not be contributing that much to the overall funding of it, because it's a relatively small piece for phase one. So, just for sake of argument, if you had $9 million worth of total betterments and residential contributed, 300,000 of that, do you really want to burn down the whole program by introducing that piece?
But at the same time, if we save them the trouble of putting a new septic system in, by giving them a sewer pipe, they've got to pay something.
It's definitely value to that
Okay.
residential residence. And you mentioned the possibility of flow, what they use as opposed to a party-room hotel. Well, is there a way of figuring out a percentage of that flow which would determine the betterment charge?
Right, that's what we do. We'd break it up into 70,000 gallon units.
Right.
And if you, up to 70,000 gallons, your betterment would be, based on that one. If you had, 400,000 gallons, it would be based on.
So 70,000 would be the average usage for residential home?
Yeah.
Single family home, yeah.
Okay.
So maybe the cutoff goes up slightly, since that is an average.
Because the design flow is still 60 gallons a bedroom on Title V? That's still design flow?
No, it's 110,
These are 110 per bedroom?
Mhm.
but we're basing it off actual flows.
Mhm.
Because Title V is based on a maximum day flow.
But you have to consider that what you can compare actual flows of a particular property, but that could change. You have to still figure maximum potential, right?
Well,
Say that seasonal home goes back to being year-round use, you still have to account for that, or however it gets used in the big picture and the individual.
ultimately, the
Scope.
facilities that are built will be designed for the peak flows in the summertime. So, but your ultimate water use is going to be based on the average day flows that you have put forth in your comprehensive wastewater management plan. And you're going to have to manage to those flows.
Right.
So, for instance, the land use controls that Howard's just adopted says that the flow in a given parcel is limited to what the flow was on an annual basis on, I think it's July 1 of 2016. So you can add another bedroom as long as you don't increase your flow. I mean, that's the reality is, you can have 4 people living in a house and have a certain flow for those 4 people. And they may live in 3 bedrooms. Well, then you can add 2 more bedrooms and have a spare. You're still going to use the same amount of flow. So it's more pertinent to manage to the flow than it is number of bedrooms.
Well, but number of bedrooms could
And the
potentially
flow is
change
where the
flow.
nitrogen's coming from.
Right.
And the flow could change. I mean, again, look at VCOD, the 4 villages, and all the zoning opportunities that were brought forward. And that zoning, with that in mind, there's a lot of small lots that are adjacent to each other and go relatively deep off of 28. And we thought on the planning board that by a developer coming in or a business owner, who owned one of the street lots, if he got his abutters together, partner with them, then they could put in maybe a branded hotel, a 5-star hotel. And that was the concept that we were looking for. So my question to you is, if you're looking at the flow now, and you're looking at And you should consider the possibility of additional development far and beyond what's there for those individual small parcels.
And that's what Karen is gonna
That's the
take.
question that's in front of Karen today.
Right.
So she's planning on taking a parcel by parcel look as to what it is now versus what it could be,
Okay.
and making sure that there's enough set aside to accommodate that
Well,
growth.
that's where the percentage of additional flow comes in. And that's, I think, would offset the concern relative to a large building going in there.
And that's why
Yeah.
previously, we had taken those flow projections, but then added another flow allowance over and above that.
Yep.
Should you change your zoning or parcels get aggregated together or whatever to account for that, but that was in your plan.
Finally, just as a nearer term, Kurt's mentioned it a couple of times, and perhaps maybe in this update or a future update to the selectmen, we could float it in front of them. This concept of the town of Yarmouth has a certain amount of new growth added to its tax levy every year. And off the top of my head, I don't know what the average is. But if let's say that over the last 3 years, the average was $350,000, and that's what you're accustomed to it to be. But because now you have development, economic development because of sewers, let's say in 10 years out, your average is now 450,000 or 500,000 in any given year. You could ask the selectmen to set a policy where any new growth over a certain amount, this is similar to the Tourism Revenue Preservation Fund, where we set a base level for meals and rooms tax. And anything over that base level goes into this tourism fund. You can do something similar with our levy through a policy. So nothing requires you to do it, but selectmen have been pretty good about adopting a policy and trying to follow it. So if you set a policy that anything over $400,000 in new tax growth would be dedicated to paying off our debt service, we could do something like that as well. So those are the three near-term decisions I think we need to work on: the betterments, the water infrastructure fund, and then this potential policy change. The other ones,
I would expand that a little bit and consider the expanded meals and rooms potential. Maybe say, or maybe it's not, but that's could be that could be a year by year basis, or that could be a policy also. Because if you look at, again, you look at the report, it talks about how underperforming our rooms are. If we can get them to perform at a better level and create more tax revenue, that's another potential funding source for things also.
so I didn't mention it, but it's similar to that would be, Dennis in particular. The one thing we don't have that other towns have been able to count on is specified local revenue sources. And we just don't have any. To the extent we have them, we do have plenty of them, but to the extent we have them, they're already baked into our annual operating budget and have been for years. So paring that away from that would then beg the question of how do you replace it in the operating budget? But we could also work towards, I do have, working with CVEC currently, and I put them on, made sure we are on their board they're doing a round 4 solar for a ground mount over at 50 Workshop Road that they're going to try to get proposals for us on, and on a couple of roof mount solar projects, similar to what Dennis has done. And so right now we haven't talked about dedicating that revenue towards anything, but potentially once I know they're coming online, I could peg those and see if that's possible to use for dedicated revenue sources. That's everybody always asks, is there some other funding source to pay for it? And the answer is, yeah, there's plenty of funding sources to pay for it, but they're already spoken for. So it'd have to be something new.
Dennis did commit some of their solar revenue to that,
Right.
which is
Substantial.
So we had this whole discussion, which Vineyard Wind, and regardless of where that fell, that was a certain amount of money. That would have been a type of thing that if that had happened, then perhaps we could have talked about that as being something that could go towards this. So to the extent those things come up, if you hear about them, let me know, and if I hear about them, I'll let you know. But these would all be opportunities that we could, new revenue sources that we could put towards funding this. That's what I got for your update on costs at the moment.
So it sounds like probably a month and a half, we probably should start having some good numbers that we can work with to as far as construction estimates and all that, which is the key to how much
Yeah.
we have to get
Start money.
everywhere.
Startup money, yeah.
And do we, is the CPA change proposed for a spring article in the WIP or not?
It, not right now, no.
Okay.
Um,
Should it be considered? Would that be a,
warrant closes,
Well, I think that a change in CPA would be fiscally.
it's
would
too
be-
soon for that
It's
one.
too soon for that.
it wouldn't take effect until 20.
21,
Was it 21 or
I think
20?
it's 21.
Yeah. So I think this spring's town meeting is 1 year too soon to make a change to the CPA. It's my understanding.
Yeah, but I think in that article, I think you can indicate
Indicate the
when
date.
it goes
Yeah.
into effect.
Look at the impact.
And it's not just a town meeting, it's a town meeting plus a ballot, and then it goes into effect like the following year after both of those if they pass.
Yeah.
Type of thing. It's a pretty extensive process to
Does,
implement it.
does it need legislative approval or not?
No.
Okay.
No,
That was
so
written into it.
It'd be a regular town election, so we'd have a town meeting and then the following week or 14 days, whatever the timeline is, it'd be on that ballot and voted, and then, and if that passed, it could be as soon as that July 1. I think the issue you might want to contemplate, we have a lot on the table for this May town meeting as far as financing of school projects and override, potential
DPW
overrides and
maybe.
things like DPW. So I think the timing of when you want to introduce this might be pretty important.
Well, it sounds like, I know there's gonna be a recommendation made to the selectmen to split town meeting into a spring and fall session, so if that goes forward, it certainly improves the flexibility of what we can and need to do.
Yeah, I had talked to Dan Knappich, and he seemed pretty certain that, we're headed towards a fall town meeting, given the number of issues that we have on the agenda. And if that were the case, and I don't know how that might impact DHY, and I'm not sure where the other towns stand either, but that might be where we're headed anyway, so.
The next question with DHY is if we approve the agreement at whatever town meeting it may be, are we committing ourselves to the plant at that point?
When you say commit to the plant, you're saying, do you need money at that town meeting?
Not at that town meeting, but does that mean that,
You're committing to forming a partnership, or what the article would read is that you're authorizing the selectmen to sign the agreement.
Yeah.
So once the selectmen became comfortable with that agreement, which would be pretty well drafted prior to a town meeting, you're authorizing them to sign it should all the participating towns pass at their town meeting.
And then any plant would be proposed by the commissioners.
So then the commission would be formed, and the commission would come up with a schedule, and they would go out and bond for the plant, but they would be sending all the financial information back to the communities for, what the funding timelines and everything would be.
but that's kind of my point, you can't just sign the agreement and say, all right, well, we have an agreement, but nothing else is gonna happen. If we sign the agreement, the three towns, and there's a time frame that says the plant's gonna go online in, let's pick 2025, we're already on that road, we're gonna have to start writing checks, correct? And then would it be up to the town to then
Yeah.
do a debt exclusion model to then pay for, potentially,
That's correct, assuming the three towns go forward with implementing their collection system construction. DHY is not gonna go build a treatment plant if there's no wastewater coming to it.
I agree with it. If you had, I guess going back to, if the plant gets built, whether you're putting product into it or not, you're gonna pay your share of the capital, so I think people need to be aware.
Yeah, if they're building it, you've already committed to paying your percent ownership share of the capital costs, yes.
So like,
If you didn't contribute a flow in the first year, you wouldn't pay any of that
operating
full
costs.
variable cost.
Right. Okay. I just think that's one of those things that's gonna come up with people, they're gonna say, well, okay, here's that question, now what about the question of the plant? But it's really built into the signing of the agreement.
They'd have, town meeting would have to vote on that as well, right?
On which
On the
The
agreement.
capital plan from the commissioners?
No.
No? it's-
they have their own
Oh, that's right, they have their
separate
own process and their own
bonding
review.
authority. Yes.
That's
But
right.
then you could also build some of that into our cost recovery too. But again, that's why I think asking phase one users to pay a system that's basically built for the first 4 phases isn't gonna be fair to them, and they won't be able to afford to do it by themselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, whether you're building your own plant or DHY is building a plant, you're paying for a treatment plant construction.
Okay. Okay, we have committee member and staff updates now. Is there anything left we haven't talked about?
Just one small thing. It came to my attention very recently that Tufts University has proposed a Master of Science in Sustainable Water Management. Now, this is the first time, and I've been involved in graduate education for the past 25 years, and I have never seen water management become a discipline that was considered critical to communities and would warrant a Master of Science. I was very, very much impressed by this. If you look at the back page, in the last paragraph, it talks about the public sector. Graduates of the program will work for local city governments and national level departments to implement enduring water infrastructure solutions. Now, by necessity, we have a local perspective. And it's necessary that we have that. But I think in the back of our minds, we should think about water as one of the 2 most critical assets to humankind on this planet. Thank you.
You're here.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a thought out there in the world that water is gonna be the new oil.
It is.
So
It is,
now,
yes.
But it's gonna be even more so as time moves forward.
And Jeff is smiling because one of the people coming to him looking for a job is going to hold one of these degrees, and he's going to be happy as hell.
Let's hope. Okay, any more updates? No? Okay, future agenda items, I think we've discussed those pretty well.
Let's make clear, so I will get a selectmen's update draft agenda for discussion.
And just one thing, at the last meeting, we had talked about doing 2 meetings in January. Again, continuing to try and get caught up, but that's up to you. We had talked about the 8th and the 22nd, but.
Yeah, we talked about having a Wednesday meeting. Is there any reason anybody can't make the Wednesday meeting?
I can't do Wednesdays.
You can't? Okay.
First and third.
Yeah, we talked about a floor, so it wouldn't conflict with the planning board. Okay, I guess we'll stick with Tuesday.
Not gonna be
So
able
is
to make it
8th?
to the 8th.
Is 8th ago? January 8th?
The 8th and the 22nd were what was proposed.
Actually, I'm on Capitol. I believe we gotta go in front of the selectmen that night.
22nd?
Yeah, I don't have to be there. But, for some reason I have Capitol. I guess maybe the 20, do you know? I guess the 29th we go, the Capitol goes in front of selectmen. So maybe it's just a regular meeting on the 22nd. So I guess we're all right with that.
Jeff might have the agenda there.
Yeah, somewhere.
That's all right. Yeah, that's fine with me. Anybody else? You said, Lisa, you can't make the 8th.
I'm gonna be out of town.
Okay,
So yes on the 22nd?
I would say yes.
January 8th and January 22nd.
Not the 29th?
Not the 29th.
So the 29th was the selectmen's meeting.
Right. Well, I have selectmen on the 22nd. I have my calendar every week anyways. And I had Capitol, but my Capitol's at 4 o'clock. So I think it's just a prep meeting for the week after. Might just be a placeholder action in case we needed it.
Right, but we had talked about potentially a selectmen meeting on the 29th, right?
But I think that's pushed into February now.
No, I think it's, they're having the
We're gonna go to selectmen on the 29th?
That's what I had looked at their
Yeah, that's-
list of meetings.
Oh, you know what it
That-
was? I think I was looking at their agenda schedule and it showed something different.
The 22nd shouldn't be a meeting for the selectmen. That's Martin Luther King week.
Oh, the
and they have
holiday, so,
week,
okay.
We don't do meetings, so.
Like I said, I just have it in there automatically, so. We'll look at the packet. and see
So
what-
you can verify it on the 8th, but tentative placeholder for the 22nd.
It's not on their agenda items right now, but whatever works.
Well, I tentatively asked the administrative office to put it on there
Okay,
pending me talking to the group, and I'll get it on tomorrow.
okay. Yeah, just if you could confirm that, so everybody's ready for that. That'd be great.
So that's 3 dates in January then, 8, 22, and 29? Just to be clear.
But we'll get confirmation from the selectmen that they're able to meet with us. Okay, future meeting dates we just did, I guess, anything else? Motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Very good, thank you all.